Welcome to Bible Fiber. This week I am interviewing Ted Wright. Ted is the founder and executive director of epicarchaeology.org. He has a BA in anthropology and archaeology from the Cobb Institute of Archaeology at Mississippi State University and an MA in Christian apologetics from Southern Evangelical Seminary. For over a decade, Ted has been a speaker on Christian apologetics as well as biblical archaeology across North America and internationally. One of the super cool things he is doing currently is working as a field assistant, photographer, and videographer for the Agri-Regional Archaeological Survey in Eastern Turkey. In fact, Ted just got back from Mount Ararat. Yes, you heard that right. Noah's Mount Ararat yesterday. So first, Ted, before we get into other things you have going on, tell me about your trip to Turkey. And after being, I think it's 13,000 feet elevation, I'm guessing, are you even acclimated yet to sea level?
Shelley, thanks. Thanks for having me on your podcast. And yes, I am just now getting back. I have it's morning here in Chicago, and I'm having my coffee. So caffeine solves a lot of problems, I'm slowly getting back acclimated to sea level life. But yeah, I just got back from Turkey, and this was my, I think, 7th time. It's my 4th time on the mountain. And yeah, it's an amazing place on so many different levels.
What exactly were you doing there? And first of all, was it dangerous at all at this time? And second, was there no thought to cancel it based off of, threats of regional war?
Yeah, it's a great question. And let me just answer that by saying that I would have answered it differently 7 years ago when I first went, because I didn't know a lot about it. But it is now that if I think about it, I think, gosh, it is kind of a dangerous place. But let me just describe where it is. It's literally in far eastern Turkey on the border of Iran. Like literally where I was staying I could literally see Iran from my window of where I was staying. There were guard towers. The highway that's going right next to the lodge hotel where I was staying goes into Iran. And so the closest city is a city called Dogobayazit in eastern Turkey. It took me forever to get to pronounce that word. So it's a huge, don't ask me to spell it though. But the city of Dogobayazit, it's known for its smuggling, human smuggling, because of they do smuggle terrorists over the border from Iran. And then a little bit further west and south, you have Syria on the border. So, but as far as being in Turkey itself, if you're actually in Turkey, you're pretty safe because there is a Turkish military unit called Jandarma that actually guards the southern border. In fact, it's another crazy story. A couple of years ago, I actually got to meet some of the top generals. We were there at base camp, and they were there checking on some military roads, and they had gotten word that there were some Americans in the high camp area. So they came into our camp and just wanted to meet us and shake our hand. It's a crazy story. That's an honest, true story. These are some of the top NATO Turkish generals. And the local governor of the Agri province was there as well. And he spoke very fluent English and asked us how we were doing. And we were like, we thought we were in trouble. And we're like, no. But they guard the border very much in Turkey, more so than our own American border, I'll say. Okay. They're very vigilant about guarding the border, but it is a primarily Kurdish area. I would say 98, 97% Kurdish. And for people who don't know, there is a cultural difference between the Kurds and the Turks. The Kurdish people, not only are they in far eastern Turkey around Mount Ararat, but they also go down into northern Iraq, also in northern Iran, and also in Syria as well. It's one of the largest people groups in the world without an actual country. So they don't really have a country. And so the people that are in the Kurdish areas who really want the Kurds to have a country, who the Turkish government would consider far right, they're considered terrorists. And they do practice some terrorist activities. So this would be a group called the PKK. And so you have groups like that in the area as well. But so that is all there. But now having been there, the people that I know, all the local people that I know, the Kurds, they would not even let me go if it was unsafe. And I've gotten to know them very well. And in fact, we're very good friends. In fact, this last trip, one of the young men who is a mountain guide told me that I was his uncle and that he has that I have a Kurdish nephew. So really sweet people. And they love their culture and they're very proud of their culture. But these people have been around there for centuries. And so, yeah, it is a very dangerous, interesting area. But if you're in the border, and you're not doing anything bad, then you don't have anything to worry about. And when you're on the mountain, there's a lot of European and even Turkish tourists that are actually climb Mount Ararat for just for fun.
Wow.
So when we were there, we saw a lot of European, a lot of Polish, German, and Ukrainian climbers that were there just doing the mountain for fun. But so the reason why I was there is that it's a long story, but I'll try to give you the quick version of it. The story starts about 14 years ago in the year, I'm horrible in math, so you have to forgive my math skills here. But in the year 2010, I was teaching seminary in Charlotte, North Carolina at Southern Evangelical Seminary and Bible College. I was teaching an Old Testament survey class and I was teaching a biblical archaeology course. And I got a call one afternoon by the then president of the seminary, who is Dr. Alex McFarland. Dr. Geisler founded the seminary, Norm Geisler. And at the time, Alex was the president. And he asked me if I would go to a closed door meeting with a group of Chinese filmmakers. And they said that it's going to be other seminary professors, archaeologists there. I'll tell you a couple other people that were there. James Tabor, who we may not agree with, ideologically, he was there at UNC Charlotte. He's known for some of his more controversial views on Jesus. James Tabor, that guy. I
really like him as a person, though.
Yeah, he's an interesting guy. Really is. Great, really nice guy. I've met him several times. He was there, several other people there. Anyway, long story short, this group of Chinese filmmakers essentially brought back footage of a wooden structure on Mount Ararat that they think could have been Noah's Ark. But they said, and they showed this raw video, and they said, we're not scholars, we're not archaeologists, but we want to show it to you to ask you what you think and to see if there might be some interest in somebody going up here to test the wood. That was in 2010. Well, there's been so much stuff that's happened between now and then, of course. And since that time, it's been very controversial. And there's been, I won't get into some of the names, but it came out in the American media that it was a hoax. The site was faked, that it was planted by a local Kurd guy, a mountain guide who knew about it, and all this sort of thing. But behind the scenes, there was always a group of people who were interested in, well, let's just go check this out. There's got to be something to it, and so anyway, to make a long story short,
wood at the top.
This is this wood. Yeah, this wood is actually near. It's in a glacial moraine about 13 to 14,000 feet. There's actually 3 possible locations, and so anyway, make a long story short, there were 3 or 4 organizations financially backing to try to find American or European scholars to at least go look at the question, to at least vet the site to see, okay, is this actually fake? Let's test the wood. Let's go up there to see if it's actually there. And so anyway, that's how I got involved. I got involved with one of these organizations early on, and just through verbal talking and, kind of as a advisor, having some archaeological experience in Israel. And really, if you're trained in archaeology of Israel or Jordan in the Levant, you are trained in tell stratigraphy and how to excavate tells. And Shelley, I know you've been to sites and you know about that. You're basically using pottery. Well, there's no methodology. There's no training to actually go investigate a site like we have on Mount Ararat. So
would you classify it as more exploring than archaeology?
Yes, I would say survey, site survey. But being involved in it now for this time, I've been there now for 7 years. I've been going off and on for 7 years. I would say that the best methodology, though, to explore this question is geology. So the principles of geology. I just watched a documentary recently on the BBC. It's been a couple of years old, but it was I forgot the guy's name. The very famous British naturalist, Richard Attenborough. Is that his name? David Attenborough, whatever his name is. Anyway, these geologists found a mosasaur skull on the side of a cliff in England, and they, of course, had to excavate this out, and they had to use all types of tools. So this kind of thing is the kind of methodology that you would use. Well, in the meantime, there's been other entities that have gotten involved, whose names I'm not at liberty to mention right now, but I'll just say that, Shelley, these are very legitimate archaeologists. These are not like, hey, we're going to find Noah's Ark. These are like serious, who know how to do archaeology, who know about they're published, they're peer review published. I was just there literally last week with the Turkish equivalent of a PhD a research geologist from an organization that's this. So you probably heard of the United States Geological Survey, USGS. So in Turkey, it's called the MTS, mineralogical something or other. I forgot the technical name for it, but it's called MTS is the acronym. But it's essentially the Turkish equivalent of the United States Geological Survey. And so anyway, long story short, that has led me to this recent trip in which we were to go. The goal was to actually go and to collect samples of the wood to do radiocarbon testing. But because of where it is, it's very difficult to get to the wood at this time. I actually saw the site. I saw with my own eyes the entrance to the site, but because it is in a glacial moraine, it is extremely, extremely difficult to actually procure a sample at this time. Now, all of that to say, to go back to the intervening years between 2010 when this came out, I've really my interest in this question is even broadened. I thought it would kind of be all resolved, but I've since come to learn that among Christian scholars, there's a big debate as to whether or not this is actually even the mountain, because some Christians believe that this mountain is actually not the correct mountain because of a certain view that they have on the geology of the post-flood world. So, and what I'm talking about are most mainline young Earth geologists, young Earth creation geologists, to reject Mount Ararat as being a possible legitimate candidate for Noah's Ark. Now, again, this is all assuming that the global flood is true, that there was a massive global catastrophic flood, which most secular geologists will reject today. But so that's opened up that question, and I have come to learn a lot from my colleagues on this, and have come to understand that this is a much broader question than just geology. You don't just look at this purely from a geological question, because we are archaeologists, and as you know, Shelley, archaeology is a study of artifacts. And this is what distinguishes archaeology from treasure hunting and conjecture. You have data, and you have measurable data that you can actually test. So we're looking at pottery, we're looking at geology, we're looking at history, we're looking at Sumerian, Mesopotamian sources, we're looking at historical sources, we're looking at even pottery sequences. And the assumption is that if this was the place where humanity began to repopulate the earth, then you should expect to find the earliest pottery technology in and around this area. And guess what? Lo and behold, Shelley, you know what you find in southern Anatolia? You find the cradle of civilization. And this is from secular scholars and archaeologists.
Signs of habitation on the mountain itself?
Well, not the mountain itself, but southern Anatolia. You have the transition from hunting and gathering to agriculture. You have it in Anatolia. And I was just there in May as well in Turkey, speaking at İGDİR University. And there was a conference on the archaeology of the region. And one of the things that I spoke about in the conference was on the title of my talk was Towards a Historical and Archaeological Geography of of post-Diluvian Anatolia, which is a mouthful. Basically, what was the world like after the flood? What would it be like? And I saw in the paper, I cited another paper that was actually done for, I think it was a 10-year study, spearheaded by Harvard University and the University of Vienna in Austria. It was a 10-year study looking at three different areas of the question of where did the Indo-European people come from. So in other words, people that live in Europe and Asia, where did they come from? Where did they originate? And they looked at it from genetics, they looked at it from pottery and archaeology, and they looked at it from linguistics. And you know where all the arrows pointed? All the arrows converged into southern Anatolia, into the area just south of Mount Ararat along that southern border of Turkey. So you have sites like Göbekli Tepe, Karahan Tepe, Çatalhöyük. These are sites that most Christians who know, biblical archaeology are not quite familiar with. These are prehistoric sites. So if these are all post-flood sites, then this is when humanity began to repopulate the earth. So the question is, how were these prehistoric sites related to what could potentially be on Mount Ararat? And so we're looking at it from a very broad question, but at the end of the day, the question is, could the ark have survived? And I would say, yes, it absolutely could have survived. Did it survive is another question, but it could have survived. And the reason why I say that is because of other organic material remains that me personally, but other scholars have discovered on mountains in Europe and Asia. And one in Italy, I think in Bolzano, Italy in the late 19, or maybe it was the early 90s, they found a human corpse. That turns out this guy was from the Ice Age. His name was Otzi the Iceman. Still skin, still in the body. So you have a perfectly preserved organic human body for according to the traditional dating is like 10,000 years old, 7,000 to 8,000 years old. So we're talking about a Neolithic human being.
It was kind of a fun, entertaining exercise. He was dressed really well, multi-layered
Yes.
jackets. And that year in Europe, I heard that it was the most popular Halloween costume.
That's great. He even had tattoos as well.
So, yeah, quite a character. I'm sure AI image generators could get really close to what he would have looked like in real life. Well, so you're saying on the geological level, there's a lot of argument for maybe Mount Ararat not being Mount Ararat. But from an archaeological perspective, and this being the cradle of human civilization, that fits the biblical story.
Yes, absolutely. And something I haven't mentioned either, and this is the whole nother dimension to this. This is what I've learned from one of my colleagues, is that when you, and I do believe very firmly that the Sumerian and Akkadian sources from Mesopotamia record, I believe, like the Epic of Gilgamesh and the myth of Atrahasis. These are Sumerian and Akkadian myths. They're drawing from the same source material as the biblical writer, but of course, the biblical writer records the correct version. I know that's an assumption that I'm making here, but I do believe that there's a lot of truth in what they record. And when you look at the language and you look at the linguistics of the actual words themselves, there's a word that in the Epic of Gilgamesh, when Gilgamesh, in the course of the story, goes in tablet 11, the famous story where Gilgamesh wants to go meet the man who survived the flood. This guy's name was Utnapishtim, and Utnapishtim lived with his wife on a mountain that is called Mashu. And the word Mashu literally means twin. There is no other mountain that fits that description except Mount Ararat. It's Ararat and Lesser Ararat. These are two twin peaks, so it means twin. And interestingly, Shelley, the British Assyriologist Irving Finkel, who wrote a book on the Ark before Noah, published, I believe, several years ago. And he believes, of course, that the Ark in the Babylonian story was a coracle, which is a round, giant, big round boat. But interestingly, though, Finkel states in this book, further in the book, that there were three Mount Ararats. There was an actual Mount Ararat. there was a symbolic Mount Ararat and a religious Ararat, and even there may be even a connection between ziggurats and the functions of ziggurats and the trip to go on top of the mountain to meet the gods on the mountain. Isn't that interesting? And so Finkel himself believes, even though he's not a believer that I know of, Finkel believes that the actual Ararat, the real Ararat, is actually Mount Ararat in Turkey. And in fact, just a few days ago, the British Museum periodically they will put out these little videos called the Curator's Corner. And the Curator's Corner had Irving Finkel, and it was in one of the tablets from the British Museum showed one of the oldest maps in the world. It was a map of Babylon, and in this map is a circular map showing this kind of outer salt water ocean, and then on the outer part of that little ocean, it had little peaks. And part of it was missing for quite a few years, and it was one of his students who was working in the British Museum. She actually found the missing piece. And they went into the museum itself and they put the missing piece. It's almost like a book. You can't make this up. They put the missing piece in, and you know what it said? And it told about actually how to read the missing piece on the back of the tablet. It was Mount Ararat in the land of the Urartu, which Finkel believes is Agri-Dog, Mount Ararat, not Mount Judy, not Mount Nasir in Iraq, but he believes that the oldest map of the world points to these places that still existed. So even apart from the geology, some of the Sumerian and Mesopotamian literature points to the oldest tradition points all the way back to Agri-Dog. And so we think it's
where you just were.
Which where we just were, yes. And so I literally, one of the last days I was there, I'd been reading about this and thinking about it for the past several years. I took a picture because right where my room is, I can literally see the mountain, and I can see Greater Ararat and Lesser Ararat, and you can see it's a twin. So I was like, "There's the twin. There it is, right here." But it's an amazing place. So Mount Ararat is a stratovolcano. It's erupted many times, and the question people have is, well, how could the Ark have survived all those years if there was a volcanic eruption? And there could be, maybe it doesn't exist. Maybe part of it does, is blown up and partially buried into the ice. But the fact of the matter is, there's a lot of eyewitness accounts as well that are very valid eyewitness accounts. George Hagopian, Ed Davis, interviewed Hagopian. I think he interviewed Hagopian. And there's some other credible eyewitness accounts. A Russian colonel named Colonel Kors as well, because that area has fluctuated back and forth between Russia and Armenia and Turkey in its long history. So people have been seeing something on this mountain for many, many years. The question is, what is it? And I'll just say this, and maybe I can wrap it up by saying this, that the people that I'm working with right now, we are not interested in conjecture. We're interested in data. We're interested in scientific, measurable data. If we don't have data, and I know a lot of my friends are like, "Hey, have you found the Ark?" Well, I'm not going to say we have found anything yet. I will say this, though. I can say that there is wood there. There's wood up there. That's a fact.
And you've seen it.
And I've seen it. The question is, how old is it? How did it get there? What was its function? These questions have to be vetted. And so far, they have not been vetted. They have not been definitively vetted. Some of the wood has been radiocarbon dated. The dates they have a range. I mean, some of it's a couple hundred years old. Some of the woods come back 3,000 years old, 4,000 years old. So why is that? And even I'll say this, Shelley, too. Even if we do find and can get some really definitive dates, and there is definitely can confirm that there's this wooden thing up there, even if it turns out not to be Noah's Ark, it's still going to be interesting. And why did people build that high up? Why did they build a wooden structure? So it could still indicate the importance of this mountain as being a mountain that the ancient people connected with a post-flood world, and possibly even the place where the Ark came to rest. So So anyway, that's it's an ongoing research project. And as when you dig at a site or you do research a site, sometimes it takes 10, 15, 20 years. And I know a lot of people, they want answers now. And I think I'm like that too. But I've been involved in this now for since 2010. And I think we're a little bit closer, but it's going to take more testing to actually get some definitive answers. But we're on the case. And we are hopeful. Hopefully, I'll just say this. I'll kind of give you a ballpark figure. This was told to me that we're about 4 or 5 years out from publication.
Okay.
So there will be some things published on this.
So if you corroborate all of the clues together, you're saying since there have been airplanes flying over Mount Ararat, there have been eyewitness accounts of some wood-like structure up there.
Yes.
There have been attempts to carbon date the wood before, but the results have been all over the place. And since 2010, you have been going up there as part of this scientific team with, I'm imagining, lots of different positions in terms of even their own biblical worldview or worldview at all. But you're also trying to get a carbon sample.
Yes.
But it hasn't happened yet because it's not accessible?
Well, it has to do with the permits and international. We want to do this by the book, and which means we have to work with Turkish universities and Turkish scholars and Turkish organizations, and now we have this access to Turkish organizations. And there's nothing wrong with that. That's great. But Turkey, they want, so there are some scholars in Turkey who want to make Mount Ararat a national park, a cultural park or cultural heritage park. Apart from Noah's Ark, they just think it's a cool. I mean, understandably so. It'd be like us wanting to make Mount Rainier a national park. So that is in the works as well. But yeah. So we are really the wood is accessible somewhat, but we want to make sure it's all official first before we make any claims. And there's a lot more work that's being done. And there's more I could share. I can't right at this point, but I'll just say this. I'll keep it pretty general. But there are some very cool high tech tests that we are hoping to do in the next year or two that would really yield a lot of valuable data. And as you can probably connect the dots, if you know anything about archaeology and remote sensing, then you know that there are some really good technology that can be utilized to study this question. But I know where this wooden thing is, whatever it is. The question that I cannot answer definitively right now is exactly, is it Noah's Ark? I don't know. I just don't have the data yet, but I will say, because I've spoken to some of my colleagues afterwards, that it is the most inaccessible place I've ever been to. And my hobby is mountain climbing. I love I've been climbing since I was in the Air Force. I was a survival instructor in the U.S. Air Force, and started climbing out in Washington State. And then I just loved mountain climbing. And I got to say, this is one of the roughest, hardest places I've ever had to climb. And
how many days did it take you to get to the top?
It took about 4 days to get to where we were. And it's
acting
altitude sickness. Yeah, you're sick. You have a headache. Your oxygen. It's hard to breathe. It's hard to walk. It's kind of like being an astronaut. And then you're on this like debris field, and it's just everything's moving, and you can hear the water underneath, like running water. So it's basically a matrix of ice and rock and sand and volcanic debris, and it's all moving. So the thinking is that the wooden structure broke apart higher and higher elevations sometime in the history of the mountain, maybe even an avalanche or earthquake or something. It broke apart. It went into the glacier, and then now it's moving down the mountain in this glacial moraine. That's the thinking. That's the theory. But we don't know yet. We don't know how it got there. So we need to figure that out. And that's where we're trying to figure out right now.
I'm imagining everyone on the team has to be somewhat in shape and also love hiking mountains.
That's funny you say that, because I told one of our friends when we were there. Well, in fact, the Turkish geologist, when I was there, I was like, "You have to want to come here. You would not want to just go, hey, let's go hike in this place. You have to really, really want to be in that place to be there. I mean, I'm not even being exaggeration. I would invite anybody to come if they wanted to come. Yeah, it's really, really hard to walk, and you're gonna fall. It's not a matter of you're going to fall down. It's so hard to walk. So, which to me, again, this is an anecdotal thing, but one of the criticisms is that maybe this thing was planted there. Maybe somebody created this to look like Noah's Ark. But I got to say, just from that point, I don't see how they could do it. I could barely walk. I don't see how it would be a big miracle. So and again, I could be wrong. It could be very much something that somebody did, and it would be pretty elaborate. But that's why we're applying scientific analyses to the wood and the structure and exactly where it is, and all these kinds of things. So, but I'm excited to share. There's some data that's going to be coming out in the next several years, hopefully sooner. But that's at least kind of a ballpark idea.
Yeah, for archaeology, 2 years is a short time span, but
yeah.
And so often people use the ancient hoax wand to just wipe away inexplicable mysteries, and it never works for me. I
Yeah.
need bigger answers, and I understand even if you were able to carbon date this wood, it doesn't definitively say it's Noah's Ark.
No.
Because Noah's Ark is a tough thing to date itself. It's not as if it's Hezekiah's tunnels or something.
That's exactly right. And we've had some long conversations in the cooking tent where you sit around and drink tea and solve all the world's problems. And I remember at one point I was with some of my colleagues, and I was like, guys, and when we get this all out here, we think it's going to everybody's going to go, oh, well, let's. And no, that's not going to happen. It's going to raise more questions and more debate, and people are going to argue about it. And there's it's always going to be somebody has got a different take on it, or that we did it wrong, or the date is wrong, or whatever. But it's something it's just the nature of archaeology. Where you got 2 or 3 archaeologists, you've got 5 or 6 opinions,
The Ark itself, though, is just one of those artifacts that has never left human memory.
Mm-mm.
And much like the Ark of the Covenant or the Shroud of Turin, I feel God in that. I feel God, at least in terms of stoking our interest to connect with him through his word. And part of it is the mystery of just keeping these things in our mind and our culture and our epics. But I want to talk now, switch gears. You are the founder of Epic Archaeology, which is a website, blog, podcast, and teaching tool. So tell me what inspired you to start Epic Archaeology, and what are the organization's superpowers?
Great question. The answer is pretty simple and straightforward. So if you have spent any time in archaeology, and this is going to sound really corny, this is a kind of a dad joke thing, but archaeologists can be really dry and boring. And I mean, the subject itself is not boring, but a lot of my professors, I love the subject, but I wanted to bring academic archaeology down to earth for the common guy, for the common girl, who is interested in the question of what is the relationship between archaeology and the biblical text, and really sort of be a go-between, sort of like a Christian version of Biblical Archaeology Review that was founded by Herschel Shanks. I think Herschel Shanks did a great job of really bringing archaeology down to earth, and it's a popular subject. But I wanted to bring more of conservative take to the questions of biblical archaeology, and do it and communicate it in a visual, in a visually stimulating way. Social media. How could you share artifacts? So we came up with these. I call them, for lack of a better term, artifact graphics. So basically, it'd be an artifact, and it's got minimal data on it. It's got, what the artifact is, when it was discovered, how old it is. And so at one point, I think I marketed it as ancient shareable truth. So how do you share archaeology in a social media age? Well, you can share a Cypriot bichrome pot, to your neighbor next door by hitting the share button. And I wanted to have also a possible format to do long-term discussions. So we did the podcast. It's called Monocle and Spade, which has been on a hiatus for a while because of for some technical reasons. But we're going to be starting that back here pretty soon. I've got some really exciting guests lined up. And so that will be coming up back online very soon. We've had you on, in fact, discussing the Copper Scroll, which you'll have to tell me about that later because I want to know what the latest is on that. But have long-term discussions. We had Scott Stripling on, who is another colleague and friend of ours, Doug Petrovich, other people, and that's Monocle and Spade. And then I do another little thing that we're going to do more of called I call them arrow points. And an arrow point is like a snippet video of a certain archaeological question. That's sort of a video version of our artifact graphic. And so the Lord has really blessed. We started on Easter Sunday of 2017. And the reason why is because, I'm unashamedly a Christian. I'm an evangelical, born again Christian. And people will get on, well, I didn't know this was a Christian site. Well, it's all over the place. I don't, they're upset when they learn that I'm actually defending the Bible, with this archaeology. But I started on Easter Sunday because really that is the foundation of our faith. The historical bodily resurrection of Jesus is the foundation of our faith. If Jesus is not physically, bodily risen from the dead, as Paul says in 1 Corinthians 15, we're still dead in our transgressions and in our sins. So we started Epic Archaeology, and we believe, and I believe, I know you do as well, Shelley, and many of our friends as well, that there's good historical and archaeological evidence to believe God's word, that what it says is true, not just in the New Testament, but also in the Old Testament. It's true from the beginning to the end. We may argue and debate over some of the finer points about exactly what the nature of the evidence is. But at the end of the day, I believe what God's word says is absolutely 100% true and historically accurate. And one of my life's goals is to try to explore these questions with the tools of archaeology. And I just happened to, in the past several years, get involved in the question of, did Noah's Ark survive, and does it still exist? And it's an absolutely fascinating question. And never in a million years, I remember as a kid watching documentaries with Leonard Nimoy. You remember Leonard Nimoy? Yeah. In Search of, and I watched, and I never would have ever thought that I would actually get involved in this question directly and actually be involved in on an expedition to go research this and to actually get data. And I'm still on the project, and my hope is to turn all of the work that I've been doing into a doctoral dissertation, so that I will, get hopefully some traction out of this in my academic career. But I do plan on publishing a couple of things on it. So it is an ongoing question, and what I've discovered in my own research is that it's a much broader question than, have we found the wood? Have we found the ark? There are other little side questions that are just as interesting as whether or not the wood survived. So that's what Epic Archaeology is all about. We're really just, and we do classes for Basora Institute. It's called the Basora Institute for Judaic Christian Studies and Biblical Research. It's a Messianic Jewish Christian ministry organization. They do online classes, and I know you probably know a lot of the people that have taught on it. Dr. Arnold Fruchtenbaum and Sam Nadler. I don't know if you know who Sam is.
Yeah, I was really excited to see your upcoming class come up on their schedule list. Is this the first class that you've done with them?
No, actually, I've been teaching with Basora for about 4 or 5 years, and this is like the fourth or fifth class I've taught, I think. So the current class that's going to start tomorrow, actually tonight, tonight at 6 p.m. Is called Mesopotamia and the Bible. And we're going to be exploring the world of ancient Mesopotamia, beginning with ancient Sumer, the Akkadian Empire, the Babylonian Empire, the Neo Assyrian, and then the Neo Babylonian, and then we're going to kind of touch on the Persian Empire, the Achaemenid Empire, and how all these Mesopotamian empires intersect with biblical history. And now, obviously, it's a survey class, so we can't get into the weeds too much, but we're going to take a pretty deep dive, a sort of a seminary level dive into Mesopotamia and the Old Testament. And I'm going to be sharing some things in the class that I have learned since I've been over there, from especially on the Turkish side in the southern part of Turkey, which is in the northern part of Mesopotamia. Some things that I have learned. It is just it's opened up a whole new world for me in looking at biblical history. And I will say that, Shelley, that I'm going to go on a limb here and say that when you look at the question of biblical archaeology, and you look at it's a huge question, and you got from Genesis all the way to Revelation. I will say that one of the most well attested periods in biblical history is in the period of the prophet Isaiah and Hezekiah. And it just keeps coming and it keeps coming. And we're talking about the Hezekiah's tunnel. And just recently they found the Neo-Assyrian camp of Sennacherib outside Lachish. And Nineveh's been discovered. So these are all Mesopotamian. The Neo-Assyrian Empire was an empire that was in northern Iraq. And so we're going to be pulling out all this information. The goal of all this, to learn about these cultures and learn about the archaeology and the history of these cultures. And I'm going to be, this is where my pastoral side comes out. At the end of the day, it's interesting to me and I love it. I got to confess, I love Assyrian and Mesopotamian history. But at the end of the day, the question that most matters the most is, how does this apply to my life? How do I apply scripture to my life? What does this, because really scripture is all about making us more like Christ and reading the word and knowing the historical context. And if we know the historical context, then we can know the meaning. And if we know the meaning, then we can hopefully apply its meaning to our lives. I'll give you one example. Hezekiah. Hezekiah is a great example. Or actually his father, Ahaz, who, when Isaiah, basically he had gotten word that the Assyrians, not the Assyrians, but the Israelites had made an alliance with the Syrians of Damascus. In Isaiah chapter 7, Ahaz essentially goes to Isaiah and says, hey, we've gotten word that our northern brothers the 10 tribes in the north have made this alliance with the Syrians. And so we need to do something about this. And Isaiah says, don't worry. You are a son of David. Why are you worried about this alliance? You need to trust God. You need to believe God. And he says, I will not put God to the test. And then, of course, Isaiah says, you just ask God for a sign that he'll be with you, And then essentially, God himself had to give Ahaz a sign. He says, therefore, the Lord himself will give you a sign. The virgin will conceive and give birth to a son. You shall call his name Emmanuel. So, and then Isaiah says something very interesting. He said, if you will not believe, then you surely shall not be established. And so the message to Ahaz is the message really, the principles are for us. We have to trust God no matter what. We're not a king of Israel. We're not a king of Judah, but we are his children, and God wants us to trust him. When we are surrounded by enemies and we don't know the way out, we need to trust God. And here is an example historically of a king of Judah who did not trust God, but rather trusted in the Assyrian armies of Tiglath-Pileser to fight his battles. And then Isaiah chapter 8, he goes on to say, well, because you did this, because you didn't trust God and you trusted the Assyrians, you have opened up the floodgates. And the Assyrians are not going to stop there in Israel. They're going to overflow and they're going to come up all the way up to the neck and they're going to take you into captivity. And that's exactly what happened with Hezekiah, except they didn't quite take Jerusalem, but they did take Lachish and 46 other towns and villages in Judah. So all that to say, I know it's a long way around to say that at the end of the day, it's about learning the lessons of what these stories are all about.
And even going further back into ancient Assyria's history, I was just thinking about you and Ararat and the Epic of Gilgamesh and these other flood myths. And one reason why I just really like to immerse myself in the Assyrian epics and myths is because you realize how rich the biblical writers, what they were giving us. These Assyrian tales are amazing stories with great character development and plot thrust, but they have no moral, ethical relevance to anyone's life, not to moderns and not to ancients. And then you read the story of Noah, and it's this beautiful story about God's expectations, his hope for us, his hope for humanity, his engagement with the world through one people. So there's so much there to just even enrich our view of God and our view of God, how he interacts with us, and the way the right story was told versus the way the wrong story was.
And Shelley, absolutely, amen, sister. I could not agree more with you. If I could just add one quick thing to that to piggyback on what you're saying, in the biblical account, Hebrew scholars have discovered that there is a chiasm in the story of the flood story, and all of the verses point to chapter 8, verse 1, and God remembered Noah. God remembered Noah. Now, you got to remember, who was Moses writing to? He was writing to the Israelites as they were about to go in the promised land. And the question was, did God know who they were? Did God remember Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob? And just like God remembered Noah, God is going to remember his covenant with his holy people, Israel. And so God remembers. He doesn't forget. He has, and the other verse too that stands out in this whole story of the flood, in contradistinction between the Gilgamesh epic, is Noah found grace, hesed, in the eyes of the Lord. And so it is a story of it is a story of judgment, but it is a story of grace. It's a story of mercy.
I'll say one fun anecdote, because Epic Archaeology's website is encyclopedic with its information. And 2 Friday nights ago, I finally watched the latest Indiana Jones movie. Rotten Tomatoes just killed that movie before it even ever came out the gate, which is unfortunate. So I decided, you know what? I can't believe the Rotten Tomatoes review. Let's watch it. And I found myself Googling afterwards, as one does after a fun movie. Is that artifact real? What was it? The Dial of Archimedes?
Yes, the Antikythera mechanism.
Yes. So I came on your website.
Awesome.
So there I was Googling, please tell me more about this alleged artifact. And there you were giving 3,000 words towards where pop culture meets, biblical truth and archaeology and the ancient world. So that's a shout out to Epic Archaeology's website's relevance, because I already knew you and Google still landed.
Encouraging
Tell everybody where to find your site, how to follow you, and how to find out more about this class.
Sure thing. They can go to epicarchaeology.org. We're also on Facebook as well. We're also on Instagram and also on Twitter, although we haven't tweeted a lot. It's X now, I think it's called. But on Facebook, we have quite a lot of followers now. We have literally people from around the world. Really been blessed. We have about 15,000 followers now on Facebook. So the one thing I will say, again, for folks out there, who get on the YouTube channel, they can also subscribe to our YouTube channel. We will be getting new information, new content in the next several months. So stay tuned for new podcasts that are be coming up. Excited to share those. And if anybody has any questions, they can email me directly. It's Epic Archaeology, one word, epicarchaeology at gmail.com. epicarchaeology@gmail.com. It will come straight to me. And if you have any questions or resources or whatever for the class, they can go to Besora Institute, Besora, BESORAH, institute.org. I believe it's besorainstitute.org. And they can click on classes and they can scroll down to Mesopotamia and the Bible. It's also listed on our Facebook page. So if you scroll down, it's several different links are there. And the cost is $99 a person. It does include a certificate of completion with the Basora Institute. You can also take the course for continuing Christian education credit through the Bible Seminary, which I know you're familiar with in Katy, Texas. So we are cross-referenced there as well. We'll be giving a lot of resources. I'm going to be sending out a lot of free PDFs. You have access to all the lectures. If you can't watch the night of the lecture, Thursday nights, then you can watch the recording of it. So as soon as we get through with the class, it's recorded, and then that recording will then be sent to all the participants. So we're excited to have a pretty nice class already. A lot of people are signed up, so there's still spots available if you want to sign up. Shelley, one more thing. Let me say we do have a webinar coming up in October. I believe it's the 18th and 20th, called "Biblical Archaeology is Alive and Well," and that's also on the website. That'll also be on the Basora website. Scott Stripling will be there. Dr. Craig Evans, Doug Petrovich, myself, Abigail Levitt Van Huss now is going to be on there as well. And we're going to have a couple of special guest people who show up. So those will be surprises. But Biblical Archaeology Alive and Well, it's going to be on the current state of biblical archaeology in the world today, what we think the current state is.
Okay, well, I like that all-star cast. Well, Ted, thank you so much for being on Bible Fiber, and we'll have you back on when you 2 years from now publish something super revealing about Mount Ararat.
Thank you so much. It's been an honor and a joy to be on, Shelley. Thank you for having me on.